Ready to cozy up your space this fall? Wisco Home Goods has just what you need. Hand-poured soy candles crafted in small batches, made to burn clean, and scented with the warm, comforting notes of the season. Stop by their shop at 4664 Cottage Grove Road on Madison's beautiful east side, or browse their fall collection online at wiscohomegoods.com. Shop local, breathe easy, feel good. All autumn long with Wisco Home Goods. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Hey y'all, guess what? This week, we're giving away 4 pairs of tickets to the True North Music and Food Festival happening September 27th at the Warner Park Duck Pond. This brand new hip festival features heavy hitters in the music world. Headlining is Pokey Lafarge. Local stunners on the bill include People's Brothers Band, Mama Dig Down, Spectaculous, and more. Plus, so many of our favorite restaurants are serving up fare. I'm beyond excited. Stay tuned to the end of this episode to learn how to enter our giveaway.
Today, a familiar battle over water protection is back in our headlines. For years, Enbridge, a Canadian pipeline company, and the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa have been in a legal battle over the existence of a pipeline that bisects the Bad River Reservation. Enbridge is now trying to reroute the pipeline, but the tribe says the route still threatens their waterways. I'm CityCast Madison executive producer Haley Sperling, in for Bianca Martin, and with me today is Aaron McGroarty, state government and disinformation reporter for the Cap Times, who just wrote a big piece about the continued fight over Line 5. Aaron, welcome back to CityCast Madison.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So before we get too deep into the legal battle of today, I want to kind of take a step back and talk about Line 5's history. So we know that the pipeline has been in operation since 1953. It's a long-standing institution here in Wisconsin. Can you tell us a little bit about just like what this pipeline does, where it's located, and how it kind of came to operate on tribal land to begin with?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, it is a years-long legal battle over this. Line 5 specifically is part of a sort of vast network of Enbridge pipelines, but this particular line starts in Superior, Wisconsin, and it goes, like you mentioned, right across the Bad River Reservation and connects with the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. In 2013, the easement permits to cross the reservation that Enbridge had secured expired, and the tribe decided not to renew them. And in 2019, they sued in federal court saying that the pipeline illegally trespasses on reservation land. And that lawsuit sort of spurred the current fight that we're seeing, which is this proposed reroute around the reservation.
Okay, interesting. And so can you talk a little bit about like the players in this story? Like, who are the folks that have the most stake in this situation?
Yeah, there's actually multiple people or groups rather involved. So, of course, there's Enbridge, which is the Canadian energy company. There's the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, which is responsible for issuing permits to companies that are seeking to construct on Wisconsin land. And then there's the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, whose reservation the pipeline currently crosses. And then there's a couple environmental groups. So there's Midwest Environmental Advocates, and they're challenging the DNR's permits on behalf of 350 Wisconsin, the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, and the Sierra Club. And then there's also the Madison-based environmental law group Clean Wisconsin that is sort of filing challenges to the DNR permits alongside the Midwest Environmental Advocates. So there's a lot of players involved, which makes for a complicated sort of proceeding.
Yeah, a lot of different groups and a lot of different groups from across the state. It's always interesting to me, you know, when the Madison sort of groups get into these legal battles because, you know, as you mentioned, this pipeline starts in Superior. It's pretty far away from us geographically.
Yeah, it is. But they have some pretty intense concerns about environmental risks. And they're throwing their hats in the legal battle ring, so to speak.
Yeah. And so for your recent Cap Times cover story, which was deeply reported, you spoke with several tribal members who brought some of their concerns to light regarding the pipeline. What did they say is at stake here?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to speak with Joe Bates, who's a member of the Bad River tribe, and he spoke very candidly about the importance of the water to their community. Specifically, right now in the fall, tribal members are out in the sloughs and wetlands harvesting wild rice. And that is an incredibly important cultural piece to this tribe. They've been growing and harvesting wild rice for generations, and they are really concerned that their reroute, even though it won't be on reservation land, crosses about 100 acres of wetlands and many, many waterways that then flow onto their reservations. So the pipeline itself is no longer crossing their land, but it will cross a lot of water that then goes into the Bad River watershed. So they are really concerned. And then the Cap Times was also able to speak with a member of the Red Cliff tribe, whose reservation is way at the top of Wisconsin. And the pipeline itself doesn't cross that land at all. But their concern is, all of this water flows into Lake Superior. And so in the horrible off chance that there's a spill or a leak, or in the worst case scenario, a rupture, that all of that contamination has the potential to flow directly into the Great Lakes.
So clearly there's these concerns that it's like, even if this pipeline gets moved off of the reservation, there is still the potential for impact there. And obviously water is such a precious resource to everyone, but I know that it is incredibly, sacred to these tribes. You mentioned the harvesting of wild rice. These are just, generations long traditions that they are trying to preserve, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, so Marvin Defoe, who's the member of the Red Cliff tribe that we spoke with, he used those exact words. He said the water is sacred to us. And when I was speaking with Joe Bates in the Bad River Band, he said very, very similar things where, they don't want to see the rice at risk. They don't want to see the water at risk. They harvest fish from the water. It's just a very key part of their way of life. And he mentioned, this to them is not just an environmental threat, but a cultural one.
You know what fall in Wisconsin's like. 1 minute it's sunny and 60 degrees, the next you're scraping your windshield in the dark. Every year, someone gets caught by the first freeze. This year, don't let it be you. Think about it. Your furnace hasn't run in months. You flip the switch one night and instead of heat, you get a clunk. The dread, not another thing to do. And now you're on the waiting list with everyone else. That's why Cardinal Heating, Cooling, Plumbing, and Electric is running an early bird furnace tune-up special. It's $134 if you book before September 30th. A small price to avoid a cold, cranky house and a panicked $1,000 repair later. You're not just booking a tune-up, you're buying peace of mind before the chaos hits. Because smart homeowners, they prepare when the leaves fall, not when the snow does. Head to cardinalservice.com to schedule online now. Beat the freeze, sleep better, stay warm.
Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start that journey today? I'm CityCast CEO David Plotz, and I'm learning Spanish with Babbel. Babbel's conversation-based technique quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. I've been practicing my Spanish with Babbel's AI conversation partner. I can choose my conversation topic and have a real-time dialogue. It's great at helping me think on my feet, and it's improving my pronunciation. Also, it's really easy to do anytime on my phone using Babbel's excellent mobile app. It's just one of the many fantastic Babbel tools for learning. Plus, Babbel has a real-time feedback, progress trackers, and handy visualizations, all of which make it really easy to stay motivated to learn. I want you to learn another language. So CityCast is teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
You mentioned that in 2017, the tribe formally decided not to renew the easement, and that has led to legal battles against Enbridge. What has played out in the courts since?
Yeah, so the tribal council filed the federal lawsuit in 2019, and in 2022, a federal judge sort of agreed that without the easement permits, the Enbridge pipeline is trespassing illegally on reservation land. So the judge ruled that Enbridge needed to cease operations of that section of pipeline by June 2026. And so that sort of is how the reroute got started. Is Enbridge realized that, come next summer, they are no longer going to be allowed to operate the section of pipeline that crosses the reservation. So they came up with a sort of U-shaped reroute that goes from the western border of the reservation all the way down under. It dips right below one of the state parks and above the town of Mellon, and then goes back up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and reconnects to the pipe there. So it's about a 41-mile stretch that they're proposing. And the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources went through their sort of environmental study portion, and then they issued wetland and waterway permits to Enbridge at the end of last year. And those permits were pretty immediately challenged by the tribe and by the environmental groups in two separate challenges, right? So if you think about it, we've got, Clean Wisconsin and Midwest environmental advocates challenging in one branch, and then we've got the tribe that's represented by Earth Justice also challenging. And so that has sort of all come to a head this month with a series of what's called contested case hearings that are happening in Ashland and Madison. And this is really where all of the parties get together and sort of present their cases. So we've got the attorneys for Enbridge, the attorneys for the DNR, the attorneys for the tribe, and the attorneys for the environmental groups all getting together and sort of cross-examining the same set of witnesses, which is actually really interesting. The environmental groups are trying to prove that DNR should not have issued these permits, that not enough research was done to assess the risk. And they're also arguing that Enbridge isn't as familiar with the wilderness that their pipeline would be crossing to the necessary level to accurately assess what environment they're actually putting at risk potentially.
Wow. Okay. So there are a whole host of concerns that are laid out here. Clearly, I mean, as we know, this has been a story that is, decades in the making and will clearly continue on forward for years at least. But, I want to go back to this reroute. Like, is Enbridge on board with this proposed reroute? Like, what is their take? What is their answer to say, to at least to the tribes to say, you want us off of your land? We're going to get off of your land. This is what our offering is. Do they like this reroute?
Yeah, I mean, they were the ones who came up with it. So when they realized that, the 12-mile stretch that goes across the reservation is no longer going to be allowed to be used as of next summer, they came up with basically ultimately the most direct route around the reservation without crossing that state park. So it's 41 miles long, and they are arguing that it'll be using the newest and safest construction methods and types of pipe. And they feel quite confident that they've done their research and that any potential risks to the environment that they're prepared to mitigate or address if it happens. Of course, the tribe, being a sovereign nation, they have their own water quality standards that are actually higher than the state of Wisconsin's. And so one of their primary arguments is like, sure, you're not on our land, but any water that you potentially contaminate will flow onto our reservation and won't meet our higher water quality standards.
So again, a lot of conflicting interests here. Has Enbridge talked to this new community where the proposed reroute would be? Have we heard anything from those folks that are living in this proposed area?
No, I haven't actually. I anticipate that they're connecting with community members and sort of testing the waters, so to speak. I know that's a bad pun, but
Sure.
getting a sense from that community how they would feel. A lot of industry and construction and agriculture lobbyist groups are in favor of this reroute because of the jobs and the financial gain that the construction is said to bring Wisconsin. So they anticipate an additional 700 construction jobs for the building of the pipeline and millions in economic gain for the state of Wisconsin. Of course, the environmental groups and the tribes say that's not worth it. And the other thing is, if they were forced to decommission the pipeline as a whole, which is what the environmental groups and the tribes are calling for, that puts northern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at risk of losing a pretty critical propane source because, obviously the line goes from Superior all the way back up into Canada. But in the interim, it is, bringing propane to these communities along the route. And Enbridge estimates, I think, that about 65% of the demand for propane in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan comes from this line.
Wow. So shutting that down could mean a huge loss to a lot of the folks in that community. And, of course, jobs are always a nice thing to offer, though with the caveat that construction jobs are always going to be temporary, right? These aren't 700 permanent jobs that are maintaining the pipeline, right?
Yeah, there are so many conflicting arguments in here. It's a lot of folks are concerned about the loss that a potential decommissioning of this pipeline would cause. And then, of course, we've got the flip side where, environmental groups are saying it's high time that we get off of fossil fuels anyway.
Sure.
And then, of course, the tribe, is arguing that it's just not worth the potential environmental risk.
And there are so many potential environmental risks. It's not just the spills. I know your article outlined a lot of those sort of like secondary environmental risks in terms of disturbing natural habitats and digging into the waters and what happens to these trees. And I want to take a step back, too, and look at Enbridge as a whole, because we know that this company does not necessarily have a great track record when it comes to transparency around line breaks and oil spills. At the beginning of this year, the Cap Times reported that a major pipeline spill over in Jefferson County went undisclosed to the public for a month. Of course, there were some laws that were ingrained in this story that kind of questioned whether or not Enbridge had to disclose that. But this dumped nearly 70,000 gallons of crude oil underground, making it one of the worst spills in Wisconsin. And then before that, in 2019, Enbridge waited more than a year to report another spill in Jefferson County. So it feels to me like there's really, it's a high hurdle to clear when it comes to building trust in these communities when the communication is clearly lacking.
Yeah, and the administrative judge that's overseeing all of these hearings accepted a period of public comment on September 3rd here in Madison, and a number of folks who testified raised that exact issue.
I want to talk about these hearings a little bit that we've talked about briefly, but you mentioned in your reporting that there's a series of hearings being held this month by Enbridge and the Wisconsin DNR, both in Ashland and in Madison. Can you explain again, what is the purpose of these hearings? And is this just for the public to express gripes? What are we learning here? And how is that going to be implemented in any sort of movement?
Yeah, so the hearings are, a little bit different than what you would think of. They're not held in a courthouse. They're in state office buildings, and they're being overseen by a state administrative judge. And the purpose, while it is bringing public attention, that's not the goal. That segment of public testimony on September 3rd is not going to be the norm for every single hearing. Most of it is the attorneys for all of these different groups sort of cross-examining these environmental and construction experts. And they expect the judge to have her decision made by the end of the calendar year. That's sort of an estimate, though. She doesn't have like a hard deadline for issuing a ruling, but the hearings themselves are supposed to be wrapped up by October 3rd. Of course, that's definitely not the end of the road. You know, Tom Schwartz, the Enbridge executive, said that they expect the decision to be appealed. I spoke with Evan Feinauer, who's an attorney with Clean Wisconsin, and he said the exact same thing, that this decision from the administrative law judge is certainly not the end of the road. And whatever she rules, whoever loses that decision will probably appeal. Enbridge operates under the position that they can start construction if they win this decision, and if the environmental groups appeal. They feel like they are in the right starting construction while the appeal is processed. But Evan Feinauer said that folks could appeal this decision, and then that decision could be appealed, and it can sort of work all the way up to the state Supreme Court, which of course would be years from now. So this has been a really long legal battle, and it's definitely not anywhere close to being over.
I mean, yeah, that was my next question. What are the odds that this goes to the state Supreme Court? Because it just seems like there is going to be no happy camper on either side once these decisions get made.
Yeah, I mean, if the environmental groups and the tribes lose, I feel quite confident that they will appeal. Similarly, if the energy firm loses, you know, they will probably appeal. I have reported on policy for long enough to never make any concrete predictions, but it seems like this issue is controversial enough and has enough public attention where it does probably have the potential to go all the way up to the state Supreme Court.
Well, we'll definitely be watching for that one. And so clearly, okay, there are groups in Madison that care about this issue a lot. And, you know, I live over on the east side, and I feel like it's so hard to walk down the street without seeing a lawn sign that says like stop line 5 or, you know, something along those lines, protect our water. So, you know, why I guess should Madisonians care? Why do Madisonians care about this story? How does this come far to impact us? What are the implications here?
I think that people in Madison just love to be involved in political issues. You know, as far as concrete effects, there aren't a whole lot. I think that people who care about environmental issues and care about tribal sovereignty, they have a lot of feelings about this. The line itself doesn't come down here. You know, line 6, which is the one that goes through Jefferson County, is pretty close to Dane County. But this reroute is line 5, and it doesn't really dip below that town of Mellon. So there aren't a whole lot of like very clear-cut effects. I just think that when you think of a community that loves to get involved in policy issues, that is Madison, and specifically that is our east side of Madison, where there's all kinds of lawn signs all the time. So I'm not surprised at all that you're seeing that.
That's so true. We do love to have an opinion out here, but it does seem like to, you know, whatever happens with line 5, if there become issues with line 6, or if there become issues or proposals for other new lines, that what happens with line 5 and Enbridge up north could set a huge precedent for the rest of the state.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, well, Erin, before we let you go, what is the next step in this saga? Like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so the hearings themselves will continue through October 3rd. Then the judge will have time to sort of take everything that she learned and heard into consideration. Then she will issue her decision on whether or not the DNR was in the right to issue these permits. And that will essentially decide whether or not Enbridge can start construction. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. I think by the end of the calendar year, we'll probably have a better sense of what direction this is heading in. But right now, it's sort of wait and see.
We love waiting to see. All right. Tale as old as time. Erin McGroarty, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and explaining this to us.
Thank you for having me.
That's Erin McGroarty, state government and disinformation reporter for the Cap Times. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm executive producer Haley Sperling, in for your host Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone who cares about land and water stewardship, or someone who just likes to get involved? We will be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until next time, take good care.
Oh, good. You're still here. To you goes the spoils, then. To enter our True North Music and Food Festival ticket giveaway, head over to our Instagram page at CityCast Madison and check out our pinned True North giveaway post. Step 1, make sure you're following us. Duh. Step 2, follow the True North Festival Instagram page. Step 3, in the comments of our True North pinned post, tag a friend who you would take with you. Voila! Winners will be selected at random and contacted via Instagram for the purpose of providing tickets. No purchase is necessary, and you must be 18 years or older to win. I wish you good luck.